So, as I was making my morning matcha and enjoying the calmness and the mental clarity that this ritual gives me in the morning, my daily wandering thought was about quality tea, in particular matcha, and which is the most reputable matcha and the most high quality matcha we know of. And probably most of you out there, when you think of quality matcha, have the same region in mind, which is Kyoto, but more specifically Uji. And so I just couldn't stop but to think, why is Uji so famous? And you think of it, how much Uji tea is around? What is it that's so successful and so popular about it? Is it the place, the charisma? Is it actually the quality of the tea? Maybe it's the marketing? I don't know. So here I am at the studio to set out and investigate why Uji tea and what is it that makes it so popular, so such a requested match? And is there a chance it's hype or just incredibly effective marketing, or is it really like the only golden standard of matcha out there? Well, let's go and find out. Now, if we look at Uji, I'll be showing you Google Map screenshot here. It's a really small area located in the just southern part of Kyoto, and it has always been historically known for its rich and beautiful landscapes. And actually, Fuji is one of the most tea-growing respected regions in Japan because historically, from what we know about Japanese green tea history, it was the Buddhist monks, and in particular, one monk called Eisai in the 1100s who brought tea leaves back to Japan and brought them to this Ji temple, which was in the outskirts of Kyoto. And they decided to plant the first tea leaves in Uji. So that's the history of the Uji tea, meaning that. So Uji is basically the birthmark location of Japanese green tea. And when you look a little bit forwards into the history after that moment, there were two types of tea ceremonies that were developed. One with Murata Juko called the Wabi-cha, but it was in Nara. And then the tea ceremony we know more of today, refined by Sen no Rikyu, was defined in Kyoto. So the tea ceremony doesn't literally stem from the Uji region, but however, all of the tea that was and matcha that was used in these ceremonies arrived exclusively from Uji because it was renowned for its incredibly high quality tea. So these ceremonies would use Uji tea and nothing else. Now, Uji actually, as I was researching, is not only famous for being the birthplace of basically all of Japanese green tea, but it actually had a history of pioneering tea leaf agriculture as well. Because basically, in the 16th century, the Oishita Shabai method was invented in Uchi, which basically, in easy terms, means the shading technique that we know today, which happens for the tencha, which is the raw matcha leaves, and the gyok tea leaves, which both have this 3-week shading before cultivating the tea leaves, which increases the nutritional aspects and all of the composition of the tea leaves to create the beautiful and incredibly tasteful drink we have today. So, history and pioneers at the time. So, in terms of heritage, yeah, I get it. Like why Uji is incredibly popular and why it should actually remain the staple of incredibly high quality matcha. But something still doesn't add up. Because if you think of how much Uji tea is around and how niche of a tea this sounds like when I describe its origins and its geographic composition to you, it's not ending up. So I need to kind of look into this further. So I think it's fair to start this first part of understanding better the popularity of Uji tea is to look into what actually Uji Matcha really means today and how the situation is today in Uji. After doing some research, I found out that the average price at auction of tencha, which is the raw form leaves of matcha, is around $32 per kilogram. And actually, if you divide that, it's probably $9 something for 30 grams. And if you consider this is first harvest, second harvest, third, fourth, all mixed together, so high quality and low quality tenchas mixed together, it actually feels like a pretty pricey product to me. And when you look at more specific aspects where we talk about we're competition winning tencha, where producers from all around and farmers from all around come to try to make the best tencha they can, Uji tencha actually can sometimes reach up to $5,000 per kilogram. So one thing is sure, Uji still knows how to make an incredibly good tencha and matcha. There is no doubt on that. Unfortunately, for this video, I had ordered some Uji Matcha as well, but it's still, we've had some shipping problems, also with some blackouts in these logistic centers of the delivery services. That's been happening across Europe, so it didn't make it in time. But if we just quick look at the current situation of what producing matcha means, to make 30-40 grams of matcha in a tin like this, basically it will take, first of all, an hour of grinding cheese. It's time consuming to say the least. And actually only 50% of the tea leaves do end up becoming the final formula of powdered matcha. So when you think of the sheer volume of tea leaves you need to make, I don't know how many quantities of matcha tins. And if you just quickly think of how many Uji matchas are around and how much stock these producers must have of their own Uji matcha, you can see where it kind of starts to get fishy, or more or less you start to ask some more questions. So when I looked at a hypothetical production of pure Uji tea, tencha, and matcha, I did this quick research where the Kyoto prefecture, so Uji, which Uji is part of, only represents about 4% of the tencha produced in the whole of Japan. And when you think of that as, if we can be generous, it's probably 30%, a third of that 4% that it's producing, because the Kyoto prefecture is actually a pretty big prefecture. So I just did a quick research, and here are the numbers. Let's say I found a statistic where in 2023, the total tencha production in Japan was around 4,000 tons. If we take Kyoto prefecture's share, and let's say it's between 3 and 4%, it's going to be 140 tons. You take Uji's share, which is 30% of that, you arrive at 42 tons. So basically, we can say that Uji produced in 2023 42 tons of tencha, which then has to be grinded, remember, and see only 50% of that becomes finalized canned matcha. So when we do the whole calculation of that and you divide it into, you take a portion where it differs between producers, but we can say on average 300 grams of tencha is required to make 30 grams of matcha, more or less. Yeah, this is 10%, but maybe a little more, a little less. Basically, what comes out as a final number, obviously there's some plus minus, it's not a specific number, but in 2023, if Uji were to use all of their leaves to produce unique Uji tea matcha, they would have produced only 140,000 tins of 30 grams. Now, think of how much Uji tea is already on Amazon, how much Uji tea from other private labels you find online. Even that Poda matcha we covered, I think, mentioned in their website or in one of their ads that source their tea from Uji. You can see how the numbers now, the math is just off. It's impossible, to say the least. So I'm ever more confused than ever at this point. But as I continue my research, I found one fact that really made it all clear. And now I'll show you what it is. So this is what's up. Now, if we found out that just physically it's not possible unless the Uji region conquered some land that it can really supply all of this matcha, Uji matcha, which is around. So I had to look at this differently. And I found out with some new fresh perspective that Uji Matcha is not a strict designation of origin. It is often used for marketing, and as long as some part of the processing happens in the region of Uji, you're clear to call it Uji Matcha. And that kind of explains it all, doesn't it? And I also furthermore found out some, also chatting with my business partner as well. And then I kind of went into some blogs, and the general industry commentary suggests probably that only 10% of the Uji matcha, which is around in the global market, is probably really Uji matcha. Actually, maybe less. One concrete example I can give you guys is our tea producer, tea master, and partner at Sencha House. As I was talking to him about this, he was telling me that he can't or doesn't want to really sell too much of his labeled finalized product in the Kyoto prefecture in general, mainly because he, as one of the few families who has access to the tea leaves auction, does supply tea leaves to many producers of tea in the Kyoto prefecture. So it would kind of be an indirect form of competition. And to keep, happy family together, he decides not to sell too much of it. This, however, demonstrates that the Uji matcha, which everybody is kind of hyped up about and is being glorified, very likely in most cases has absolutely probably a percentage of Uji tea leaves in it, but it will definitely have a composition of other tea leaves from other regions, which by all means, it's not an indication of bad quality. It's just an indication of authenticity, that it's not on Uji tea. Especially when you talk about lower priced matchas, I think because of the scarcity that there must be in Uji tea leaves, they would all go for higher prices and there won't be too much volume of lower quality tea leaves. So low priced Uji matcha is probably almost sure you're not drinking Uji tea. If we just quickly deviate from this a second, and because we've left this gaping hole, because if Uji matcha is not all Uji matcha, and we've been loving this full or partial Uji matcha, what are the most potentially high quality places where to find good matcha? So we've kind of left an open-ended question here, because if Uji matcha is not all Uji, but it's still a matcha we really love, that means there must be other quality matchas lying around. So where do these matchas come from? And in particular, organic tencha, which means organic matcha, is going to be the most important form of matcha going forward, because when we talk about exporting to the EU, there's a specific requirement that the tea has to be organic. The US is slowly tightening their health and safety requirements as well. And generally, because of a health conscious audience, producing too much tencha with too much chemicals involved is not something that's going to turn out to be too popular in the future. So let's tighten the field and look for the top organic producers of Japanese tencha in terms of volume, which obviously eventually can mean there is also a high percentage that amongst this volume, there might be some quality producers as well. Now, if we look at the Ministry of Agriculture statistics of Japan, they already come out with a 2025 report of the top tea leaves producers in Japan in terms of organic tea leaves. So this also kind of means not only matcha, tencha, but also tea leaves dedicated for sencha and other types of the whole family of Japanese tea leaves. The Kagoshima prefecture, which I've been not so telling you about, 49% of the whole production of Japanese organic tea leaves. Second, the Shizuoka prefecture with 18%. Now, this is where you start to understand the difference, because if you have by chance seen one of my previous videos where I've reported that Kagoshima only this year has surpassed Shizuoka in terms of total production of tea leaves in Japan by barely 2,000 tons. This means that there's a lot of non-organic tea leaves production actually still happening in Japan. But the gap between 49% and 18% is massive, because after that, there's the Miyazaki prefecture, which is already close by, Shizuoka at 13%. And then there's the Mie at 4%, Kyoto at 4%, and Nara at 3%, and the whole other small ones compose of 9%. This actually shows you how Kyoto still produces and is up to date with a good amount of organic tea production, but Shizuoka has literally not innovated and invested in this aspect. When you see the results of the data that we've just found, it reinforces the idea that if it's exported Uji Matcha, it's even less likely that it's Uji Matcha, because half of it is produced in Kagoshima and only less than 4% is produced in Uji. I'll probably be making an in-depth video of matcha in general. So preparation methods, quality analysis, taste, conservation, the whole aspect of buying, selecting, preparing, drinking, and storing matcha. I'll probably do a whole video, so you have a whole more comprehensive guide of all of this. But in general, when we think of finding quality matcha, obviously, at the beginning, it's always going to be hard when you're new to a subject. I'm recently, tipping my toes into the wine world myself, and that also, is not a simple world, an equally complicated world, I'd say, to navigate. And I think it's fair that in the beginning, you go with the surefire, most reputable labels and regions. Like, if I was in wine, I'd probably go to Barolo and get a Barolo wine. You're not going to go wrong too bad. If you go to Barbaresco and buy a Barbaresco of a certain year of a certain price, chances are it's good. So it makes sense that you would start with Uji Matcha, and why not? But once you get the hang of it, I think there's a couple of things which one should keep in mind. First of all, embrace the journey. Like, there's nothing wrong with not knowing how to choose great matcha in the beginning. It's fine, actually. I think that's the fun part. You start with something, start to learn this something, and then you slowly learn to move on to the next thing and discover more about the matchas around. And then it's when the next step, or we can call it the parallel first step, is yes, you can start with selecting the Uji Matcha, which is very likely to be good. But as I did with wine, always combine it with a decent price tag on it, unfortunately, at the beginning, if you really want the high quality ceremonial matcha you're looking for. Because, as we've just researched and talked about, if it's niche and if it's supposed to be quality, but the price is low, something's off. Something is definitely off. So if it's a decent price, you can know whether it is 100% Uji or not. It's going to be good matcha. Now, once you've dabbled with Uji, I would be lying and not being true to myself and not saying that check out Kagoshima. You saw the statistics. It's not something I just invented. It doesn't have to be Ikeda matcha. Obviously, we're here. We're a multi-language speaking reality between Japan, English, and Italian, so it can be easier to talk to us. But Kagoshima produces 49% of Japan's organic tea leaves, not only tencha. So that means that most of what's exported in the US and specifically in Europe, because Europe has very tight import regulations, is probably from there anyways. So you might as well go directly to the source. That's what you do with most quality things, right? Like, it's nice to go to the vineyard of where that wine is specifically produced. So have fun, enjoy this part of discovery. Now you know that Uji Matcha is still quality, but it's not the wholesome, whole Uji Matcha tea everybody maybe might think it is. In most cases, it'll probably be a blended tea of other tea leaves from the Kyoto prefecture or the Miyazaki, or it'll change. These producers still are high quality producers, so they know how to choose it. Anyways, with this being said, I hope this helped you clarify this aspect about matcha and Uji tea leaves, and probably, maybe, hopefully, it will have inspired you to even start with Uji, but then dig in a little bit deeper in this world, which has so much more, many more interesting stories to tell and many more interesting producers to discover, other than ourselves, obviously. Now, let me know your personal thoughts on Uji Matcha, Uji tea, if you have found really bad quality Uji Matcha, if you've always encountered good ones, or whatever your experience is about Uji. I'd love to know. Like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this, and thank you, and see you at the next one. Bye.